Today, as a longtime freelancer, I want to go over the pros and cons of what a freelance lifestyle really looks like, or what the reality of freelancing is. The pros are pretty obvious. It's a fun life. You're always going somewhere new. You have a different schedule all the time. But sometimes musicians don't realize any cons until much later in their career. Freelancing can be an amazing experience, but it's often at the expense of many things. So let's go over what you're getting yourself into. The biggest pro, I think, to freelancing as a classical musician is leading a very fun life with interesting experiences all the time, an always changing schedule. You have different types of gigs all the time. You can be doing weddings or playing backup to a well-known or famous band, and being in the pit for an opera. You also find yourself in interesting situations on gigs. For instance, some of us musicians in Chicago got called last minute for a gig to be a classy orchestra playing in the background for R. Kelly's birthday party for his girlfriend or wife or somebody. We all converged at this well-known steakhouse, I believe it was in Chicago, to play opera arias in the background while R. Kelly and his entourage had their event. That is something that not your everyday average person gets to experience. Turns out R. Kelly is not the greatest person in the world, but still that you see all kinds of different people and different experiences out into the world, which you wouldn't otherwise get in a more traditional job or even in a full-time orchestra job. You're not getting that variety of experiences. On the topic of variety, you're working with and you're connecting with different types of people, different kinds of people, all of the time. So you're always, when you show up to the gig, you never know who you're going to be sitting next to, who else is in the band or the orchestra. Another thing that I've realized much later in life is that as a freelance musician, you're learning basic skills that you didn't even know were basic skills to learn. It's just common sense. But it turns out not everyone has this. And what those are managing your own schedule, getting yourself to the gig on time, figuring out how to park, how to get your car there, how to find the stage door. Because in traditional desk jobs, or even, again, full-time orchestra job, which is an entirely different way of being a musician, is you have your one venue you show up to every time, you park in the same place, you're told how to even park there. Everything is securely set. But for a freelance musician, you're really navigating changing waters all of the time, and these create a great skill of being an adaptable person and a person that can just figure things out. Something I've noticed being around freelance musicians in particular is an attitude of being grateful for the gig. Maybe desperate, but regardless, this attitude that is created turns out to be a life skill. Even if the gig you're on, the music is boring or mediocre, or you don't like the conductor or whatever, you would never express that outwardly. What this does over time is create a general attitude of respect for other people, humility, grace, and gratitude, which you don't find everywhere. Another thing I love about being a freelance musician is being in places like in the pit or backstage and seeing those environments kind of behind the scenes. For instance, witnessing a star diva soprano coming from backstage at Lyric Opera, for example, in Chicago. I was playing an offstage Banda part, and while I was waiting around in the wings with my fellow freelancers, this famous opera singer came on in her full gown costume that she had on, but with just flip-flops on her feet. And she climbed up these stairs around the back side of the stage. She wasn't visible yet to everybody in the audience, and then took off the flip-flop shoes and put on her heels. And then the door prop person opened the door for her, and then she came out and sang this glorious opera to the audience. But no one besides us backstage people had seen that transformation and see what really happens behind stage, which I find fascinating, and I love to watch it all. Also, being a freelancer with all the various things you get to do, the different gigs you get to experience, one of the best things musically I got to do is to have the opportunity to sub in a full-time orchestra where you're playing music with top-level players that play together all the time, which makes a big difference. and usually playing great repertoire with a great conductor. So you have an opportunity to be in an environment where everything's done ideally at the highest level. So onto the cons, and usually all the pros that I mentioned have their mirror effect con. It's kind of, one is the same as the other, depends on how you look at it or where you are in life. So the very first thing I mentioned for a pro was that your schedule's changing all the time and you're always somewhere different and you have a variety of music you're playing. But on the con side of that, over time, this creates a lot of anxiety. There's no structure in place for you. You could often have months, literally months without any work. That of course creates a lot of anxiety. You're also always working holidays, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, doing nutcracker runs during the holidays, while most everyone else is off with their family or on a vacation. And when you're young, again, doesn't really matter, I think, as much. But over time, as you get older and you're still freelancing, which you will be, that starts to wear on you. Biggest con, I maybe should have started with this, but the biggest con is that you don't have healthcare. For example, that's probably the biggest one built in. So you're just buying your health coverage independently, which gets to be so expensive that usually most people just try to wing it without. I certainly did for many, many years. Also, all the scrambling around and having an unsecure paycheck here and there usually leads to no savings account or very minimal savings account, just never quite being able to build anything financially. There's no built-in maternity leave. So I've experienced that when I was pregnant. I still had to play all the way up until I could. And then as soon as my daughter was born, I had to get right back out there 2 days later. You have to. There's no protection for you because you're not working for an organization. It's just you. And if you want to stay getting called, you just absolutely have to be available. No sick days. There's nothing built in your schedule. Again, you're your own person, you're your own independent contractor, so there's no such thing as a sick day. I've played, as all freelance musicians have, totally sick. Things might be a little bit different now with COVID, coming out of COVID now, hopefully. But I've played with double ear infection, not being able to hear anything, but I just showed up and did the best I could because I couldn't say no to this one orchestra, I felt, because I was afraid of not getting called again. It's always this anxiety of that is very real. You also have no real retirement plan. So you'll hear a lot if you're able to sub in full-time orchestras, people, their colleagues talking about, having a countdown for their retirement. And I always remember thinking, retirement, I can't even imagine. Also, you can't really have planned vacations. It sounds extreme, but it's true. If you're a freelancer, you need to be available virtually all of the time. So if you finally get called for an orchestra or from a contractor that you really want to work for, or some orchestra that you've really wanted to get in with, and if you finally get called and you're in the San Juans or something, that's it. You missed it. You missed your opportunity. Especially, and I cannot say this enough, especially as a flute player, you're completely replaceable. So you always have this feeling that you've got to be available at all times. So no one, first of all, you don't have any money to anyway, but you don't take vacations like normal people. My first experience taking a vacation that I planned in advance is when I happened to be so fortunate to have a 1-year contract with a full-time orchestra. And then it was in my schedule that I had for the whole year, a week in March, I remember, where the orchestra was off, and I could actually plan the summer before to do a vacation. That's unheard of in the freelancing world. You just can't do that. Or what a lot of freelancers do, if you happen to take a gig that puts you in Southern California, or in my case, might take you out to Hawaii, you create your vacation within that gig. So while you're there, you go to the museum on the next day in that town, or you try to create a little vacation for yourself in the town where you might be freelancing. Another thing that is bizarre and may not bother a lot of people, but it's something to just think about is that your role as a classical musician is really not valued in American society. So you'll always encounter well-meaning and well-educated people say things off the cuff to you that makes it very clear that they have no idea what you do or that it requires any kind of skill. For example, when I first moved to Chicago and I was talking with some friends about freelancing, you know, how to get into the different scenes, and a friend suggested that there was, she knew of an orchestra in Chicago that I could probably go and sign up with. And she meant the Chicago Symphony, the Chicago Symphony. And she's a well-educated person. It would be as if I suggested to somebody to check out the baseball team that's in Chicago because you could probably sign up and play with them, and for me to be referring to the Cubs. That would be absurd. But to this person, the Chicago Symphony, that was just an orchestra that you could probably just go play with. Another con is all the driving you are going to be doing. So it is not unheard of to drive anywhere from 1 hour to 5 hours, and I'm not exaggerating, to get to a gig. And that gig could just be a $50 paying service for orchestra, or it could be more, but you're going to do it because you try to get everything you can because there's just not that much out there. So it can be stressful and create anxiety of all the driving you have to do. You're constantly fighting for gigs or making yourself available all the time to get the gigs that you want to get and to navigate a complex schedule. And even though after all of that and you are successful in playing for many, many years with a particular orchestra that you like or working for a contractor that always calls you, it can happen any day for any reason or for no reason at all that all of a sudden you won't be called anymore. You are always replaceable. And the one thing I would just keep in mind is that freelance gigs are not forever. So freelance gigs can be amazing and fun, but you're not protected by an organization like a symphony orchestra, and you just can't count on it forever. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of balance through my real life experience of many years and continuing of being a freelance musician, of when I reflect back the pros and the cons of it, so you know what you're getting yourself into. Some freelance musicians end up going creative, which I always admire, creating their own music festival, which they run, or creating their own online modern music forum, which they run, and navigating grants. And I think a key to having a great freelance career is to not be dependent on traditional orchestral style gigs and to realize that they won't last forever. So freelancing should not sound hopeless, but it is difficult. So I wanted to put here the pros and the cons, and as Erica says from Stranger Things, just the facts. If you like this video and want to see more behind the scenes of freelancing, click the submit button, and I will see you next time.